Have you ever looked at your own son, the child you raised and provided for, and seen the eyes of a stranger looking back at you? That was the question that echoed in my mind, a cold premonition at the most expensive table in Atlanta, just moments before I would discover my life was in imminent danger. My name is Charles Evans. I am 68 years old, and this is the story of how I lost a son, but saved myself. The restaurant was the Skyline Perch, a place so high above the city that the blinking lights below looked like a fallen constellation. It was the kind of place you book for a celebration, a milestone. And I had one. After 45 years of relentless work of building a respected business from nothing but dust and determination, I had finally sold Evans Construction. I was a free man with a fortune that could last several lifetimes. I wanted to share this moment, this triumph, with my only son, Andre, and his wife, Monique. I had thought it would be a night of joy. I could not have been more wrong. I let the news settle between us, hanging in the air over the pristine white tablecloth. "I've sold the company," I said, my voice steady, betraying none of the turmoil I felt. "The deal is done. It's time for me to finally rest." The reaction was immediate, though masked by a thin veil of civility. Andre, my son, forced a smile that didn't reach his eyes. His posture stiffened. "Wow, Dad, that's big news," he managed to say, swirling the ice in his water glass. "I just wish you had discussed it with me. The legacy, the future of the Evans name." His words were about legacy, but his tone was about inheritance. It was the sound of a door slamming shut on a future he had taken for granted. Monique, on the other hand, was a master of her craft. She placed her perfectly manicured hand on my arm, her touch as light as a spider's web. "Oh, Charles, this is wonderful," she cooed, her voice dripping with artificial sweetness. "You deserve it. You've worked so hard." She picked up the crystal pitcher and refilled my glass of cranberry juice. It was the third time she had done so. "You have to keep your strength up, Dad. Now is the time to relax and let us take care of you." Her eyes, however, told a different story. They were cold, calculating like a predator assessing its prey. As she spoke, a strange sensation began to creep over me. A gentle wave of dizziness, a subtle fog settling over my thoughts. I blinked, trying to clear my head. It must be the exhaustion, I told myself. The stress of the last few weeks finalizing the sale. I never touched alcohol, so it had to be fatigue. But the feeling was persistent, an unwelcome guest at my celebration. I took another sip of the juice Monique had so graciously poured. "We should toast to the future," Andre said, raising his glass, the bitterness still clinging to his words. We all drank. Monique's eyes met mine over the rim of her glass, and for a fleeting second, I saw a flicker of something triumphant, something chilling. Then she turned to Andre, her smile bright and sudden. "Darling, they're playing our song. Let's dance." They stood up, leaving me alone at the table, a solitary old man surrounded by the ghost of a happy family. Just before she turned to walk away, Monique glanced back, not at me, but at my half-empty glass of juice. It was a look that lasted only a second, but it was filled with an unnerving intensity. Alone, the feeling of unease grew stronger. The city lights outside seemed to blur. I felt the artificial warmth of Monique's hand on my arm, heard the entitled disappointment in my son's voice, and I knew with a certainty that chilled me to the bone that this was not a celebration. It was something else entirely. Something far more sinister. I was sitting at a table with my family, but I had never felt more alone or more in danger. I sat there alone, the panoramic view of the city, a blur of indifferent lights. The strange dizziness was getting worse, a soft pressure building behind my eyes. I felt a growing sense of dread, a primal instinct screaming that something was terribly wrong. My son and his wife were on the dance floor, moving gracefully under the warm lights, looking for all the world like a happy, loving couple. But the image felt like a lie, a carefully constructed play for an audience of one. Me. It was then that a man approached my table, moving with a quiet urgency that cut through the restaurant's ambient chatter. He was an older man, maybe in his early 60s, with kind eyes and a face etched with the lines of a long, decent life. He wore the crisp uniform of the restaurant's security staff. He leaned in close, his voice a low, urgent whisper that was meant for my ears alone. "Mr. Evans," he said, his gaze serious. "My name is Walter. I'm the security lead tonight." "I am not supposed to do this, sir, but I have to tell you. I was watching the security monitor. I saw your son. When he thought you were distracted by the waiter, he poured something from a small vial into your juice glass. His words struck me with the force of a physical blow. The fog in my mind, the strange dizziness, it was not fatigue. It was poison. The realization did not send me into a panic. Instead, an ice-cold clarity washed over me, burning away the drug's effects with a surge of pure adrenaline. In that single horrifying moment, the son I had loved ceased to exist. In his place was a threat, and for 45 years I had learned how to deal with threats. I looked at the man Walter and saw the genuine concern in his eyes. He was risking his job to do the right thing. "Thank you, Walter," I said, my voice barely a whisper, but as steady as stone. "You may have just saved my life." My mind was already working, formulating a plan, my decades of experience as a CEO taking over. There was no room for emotion, only for strategy. My hand moved smoothly to the inside pocket of my jacket, where I always kept a small, empty pill vial for my heart medication. It was a habit of a cautious old man, a habit that had just become the most important one of my life. Shielding my actions with the menu, I carefully unscrewed the cap and poured a small amount of the tainted juice into the vial. I sealed it tightly and slipped it back into my pocket. Evidence. That was the first rule of any battle. Secure your evidence. I then stood up, my movements deliberate. I picked up my glass and walked towards the men's restroom, my posture straight, my pace unhurried. Inside, I went to the farthest stall and poured the remaining contents of the glass into the toilet. I watched the dark red liquid, my son's betrayal, swirl and disappear. I then walked to the marble sink, rinsed the glass meticulously, and dried it with a paper towel, wiping away any lingering trace of what they had done. I was erasing their crime, taking back control. When I returned to the table, Andre and Monique were just walking back from the dance floor, their faces flushed. They saw me standing with my coat. A flicker of panic crossed Andre's face before he masked it with a look of concern. "Dad, are you leaving so soon?" he asked. "I'm not feeling well," I replied, my voice calm, neutral. It was the truth, but not in the way they imagined. "I need to go home and rest." I reached into my wallet and pulled out a $100 bill, placing it on the table to cover more than the cost of our unfinished meal. I looked at neither of them. I simply put on my coat and turned to leave. As I walked away, I did not look back, but I could feel their eyes on me. I could feel their confusion, their dawning horror, that their perfect plan had somehow gone awry. They stood there frozen, watching me walk out of the restaurant and out of their lives, not yet realizing that the game they had started was now being played by my rules. The war had begun, and they had no idea that I had just won the first battle. The ride back to my penthouse was silent, the smooth leather of the seat cold against my back. Outside the window, the city of Atlanta unfolded a tapestry of light and steel that I knew as well as I knew my own hands. Each skyscraper, each bridge, each quiet park held a piece of my story. They were monuments to a life built on sweat sacrifice and an unwavering belief in doing things the right way. As the car moved through the sleeping streets, the memories came flooding back, not as a gentle stream, but as a tidal wave of clarity washing away years of willful ignorance. I remembered the early days. Evan's construction was just me, a used truck, and a toolbox. I remembered working 20-hour days, my hands raw and bleeding, my body aching with a fatigue so deep it felt like it had settled into my bones. I remembered the nights I slept in that truck because I had poured every last dollar into payroll, making sure my first few employees could feed their families before I even thought about feeding myself. My late wife Eleanor would bring me coffee and sandwiches at midnight, her belief in me a steady flame in the darkness. We weren't building an empire. We were building a life, a good life, one honest day's work at a time. My goal was never to leave a fortune for someone else to enjoy. It was to build something that would last, something that stood for integrity. And as I looked at the gleaming results of that life's work, I finally allowed myself to see the truth about my son. The warning signs had always been there, like hairline cracks in a foundation, small imperfections that I had deliberately painted over year after year. I remembered Andre as a young man given a summer job on a construction site. He lasted 2 days. "It's beneath me, Dad," he had said, complaining about the heat and the manual labor. I had seen it as youthful arrogance, then not as the deep-rooted entitlement it truly was. He never wanted to learn the business from the ground up. He only wanted to start at the top, to inherit the corner office without ever understanding the grit and sacrifice that had built its walls. He saw the company not as a responsibility, but as a birthright. And Monique, she was subtler, more dangerous. I recalled countless family dinners where her conversation wrapped in layers of sweet compliments would always circle back to the same topics. Finances, investments, the details of my will. "Charles, you must have a plan in place," she would say, her expression one of deep concern. "We just worry about you being all alone." I had seen it as daughterly care, not as a vulture circling patiently waiting for a sign of weakness. She was a gifted actress, and for years I had been her most captivated audience. The car turned onto my street, and the most damning memory of all hit me with the force of a physical impact. It was about a year ago. Andre and Monique had sat me down in my own living room, their faces a perfect mask of loving concern. "Dad," Andre had started, "we were thinking. You're not getting any younger. What if something were to happen? A fall and illness. It would be a nightmare trying to access your accounts to pay for your care." Monique had chimed in, her voice soft and persuasive. "All we're suggesting is adding Andre as a trusted third party on your main accounts. It's just a precaution, a safety net. It would give us such peace of mind knowing we could step in and help if you ever needed it." They had played on my deepest fears, the fear of becoming helpless, of being a burden. It had seemed so logical, so responsible, a prudent step for a man of my age. I had gone to the bank the next day and signed the papers. I had willingly handed them the key to my entire life's work, believing it was for my own protection. Now, sitting in the darkness of the car, I saw the scene for what it was. It wasn't an act of love. It was a calculated move in a long, silent coup. They hadn't been building a safety net for me. They had been building a cage. The car pulled into the private garage of my building. As the engine went silent, so did the storm of memories in my head. All that remained was a cold, hard certainty. The son I had raised was a stranger. The woman I had welcomed into my family was a conspirator. And I, Charles Evans, the man who had built his legacy on foresight and strength, had been played for a fool, but their game was over now. I stepped out of the car, the vial in my pocket feeling as heavy as a block of granite. They had mistaken my love for weakness. They had mistaken my trust for foolishness. They were about to find out just how wrong they were. The heavy oak door of my penthouse closed behind me, shutting out the world. The silence within was absolute, a stark contrast to the storm raging inside my heart. But there was no time for grief, no time for the searing pain of betrayal. Emotion was a luxury I could not afford. Survival was the only currency that mattered now. I walked directly to my home office, the command center from which I had run my company for decades. The room was dark, but I didn't turn on the lights. I felt more comfortable in the shadows. It was where the most important battles were fought. My first action was to pick up the secure line on my desk, my fingers dialing a number I knew by heart. It was answered on the first ring. "Davis," a crisp professional voice said. It was my lawyer, a woman as sharp and unyielding as tempered steel. I had hired her precisely for her ability to handle crises without flinching. "Ms. Davis, it's Charles Evans," I said. My voice was low and devoid of any warmth. It was the voice I used when a multi-million-dollar deal was on the line. "Activate plan firewall. Full protocol. Confirmation code. Phoenix." There was a pause on the other end, but not of confusion. It was a pause of comprehension, of immediate understanding. Plan firewall was a contingency I had created years ago, a series of legal and financial maneuvers designed to protect my assets from a hostile takeover or a catastrophic event. I never imagined the hostile takeover would come from my own son. "Understood, Charles," she replied, her own voice now a fraction colder, more focused. "The irrevocable trust is being established as we speak. I will begin severing all designated third-party authorizations. Do you need immediate assistance?" "No," I said. "Just execute the plan." "Fast." I hung up without another word. The first wall of my defense was going up. Now for the second. My fingers dialed my private banker, Mr. Henderson, a man I had trusted for over 30 years. "Henderson here." "David, it's Charles Evans. I need you to do something for me immediately and with absolute discretion." "Of course, Charles. What's going on?" "You sound focused." I cut in. "I need you to freeze all third-party access to my personal and corporate accounts. Specifically, any access granted to my son, Andre Evans. Revoke it, effective immediately." There was another pause, this one filled with concern. "Charles is everything all right. Andre has had access for over a year. That is precisely the problem, I said, my voice dangerously calm. Please just check for any recent activity, anything unusual. In the last hour, I could hear the soft clicking of a keyboard on his end. The silence stretched on thick with tension. Then I heard him draw a sharp breath. "My God, Charles," he said, his professional composure finally cracking. "It's a good thing you called. Just a few minutes ago, a wire transfer for $5 million was initiated from your primary account. It was authorized using Andre's access credentials. The destination is an offshore account in the Cayman Islands." A cold dread colder than any I had ever felt washed over me. $5 million. It wasn't a desperate grab. It was a calculated, significant theft. The first step in draining me completely. They had acted the moment they left the restaurant. They had assumed the poison was working, that I was either incapacitated or on my way to the hospital. They were trying to empty the vault while the owner was dying. Did the transfer go through? I asked, my knuckles white as I gripped the phone. No, Henderson said quickly. The size and destination triggered a security protocol. I put a temporary hold on it for verbal confirmation. I was about to call you. Relief, sharp and sudden, pierced through my anger. It was a near miss. A hair's breadth from a devastating financial blow. "David," I said, my voice now a command, "cancel that transfer immediately. Report it as fraudulent. And I want you to initiate another transfer. The entire $43 million from the sale of Evans Construction. I want it all moved into the new irrevocable trust account. The details should be arriving from my lawyer, Ms. Davis, any second now. I want it done tonight. Charles, that's the entirety of your liquid assets." He began, but I cut him off. "I am aware," I said. "That is the point. I am moving my entire life's work to a place my son can never touch again. I need you to confirm when it is done." "Understood, Charles," he said, his voice now filled with a grim respect. "I will handle it personally." I hung up the phone and leaned back in my chair, the darkness of the office a comforting cloak. The race had been closer than I knew. They had been seconds away from stealing a significant piece of my soul. But they had failed. The walls were up, the money was safe, the battle was far from over, but I had survived the opening salvo. Now I would prepare for their next move, and I would be ready. The moment the doors of the elevator closed, leaving them in the silent, opulent lobby of the restaurant, the facade crumbled. The second they were inside the plush interior of their Mercedes, the venom erupted. Monique turned on Andre, her eyes blazing with a fury that was far more terrifying than any physical violence. Her voice was a low, vicious hiss, a stark contrast to the sweet tones she had used with me just minutes before. "You fool!" she spat, her perfectly painted nails digging into the leather of the dashboard. "A fool and a coward. I told you the dose was too weak. I told you we needed something that would work quickly, decisively." Andre flinched, his hands gripping the steering wheel so tightly his knuckles turned white. He stared ahead at the traffic, refusing to look at her. "I'm not a murderer, Monique," he whispered, his voice trembling. "This was supposed to just make him compliant, make him listen to reason. I don't want to go to jail." Monique let out a laugh, a sharp, ugly sound that held no humor. "Jail? You think that's the worst thing that can happen now?" He knows Andre. That old man knows everything. He didn't leave because he was feeling sick. He left because he was playing us. That calm, quiet exit was a declaration of war. He is already moving against us. "The $5 million, did it go through?" Andre fumbled for his phone, his fingers shaking as he tried to log into the offshore banking app. He stared at the screen for a long moment, his face paling. "It's gone," he stammered. "The transfer was canceled. The account is frozen." The silence in the car was suddenly suffocating. Monique's fury seemed to cool, replaced by a chilling reptilian focus. The panic was useless now. It was time for a new strategy. She watched the city lights flash across her husband's terrified face, her contempt for him a palpable thing. He was a tool, and a clumsy one at that. But the game was not over. If they could not take the money while he was incapacitated, they would have to take it from him while he was, in their words, incompetent. Her entire demeanor shifted. She straightened her dress, smoothed her hair, and took a deep, calming breath. The predator was reasserting control. She pulled out her own phone and found my number. "We need to control the narrative," she said softly, as if speaking to herself. "We tried to help him, but he's old, confused, and paranoid. It's a sad story, but a believable one." She put the phone to her ear, and as it began to ring, her face transformed. The hard lines of her anger softened into a mask of loving concern. Her voice when she spoke was as sweet as honey laced with poison. Charles. It's Monique. She began the picture of a worried daughter-in-law. We were so worried when you left. You just seemed so confused. Are you home safe? We want to come over and make sure you're all right. She listened for a moment, her eyes narrowing slightly. Oh. Well, we are just concerned about your health. You've been forgetting things lately, and after tonight we think perhaps it's time you let Andre help you manage your finances. Just for a little while, until you're feeling more like yourself. She was laying the foundation, planting the seeds of doubt about my mental state for anyone who might be listening. She was creating a record of their supposed loving care. I can only imagine the cold shock on her face when my only reply was a quiet dismissive "thank you" before the line went dead. She stared at her phone, stunned. He had hung up on her. He had refused to play his part. Her anger returned hotter this time. Fine, she snapped, her voice hard again. He wants to play it this way, we'll play. She turned to Andre. Drive to his building, now. What are we going to do? Andre asked, his voice weak. We are going to show him we are serious, she said, dialing another number. Dr. Albright. It's Monique Evans. Yes. The situation with my father-in-law has escalated. We believe he is a danger to himself. We are at his residence now. Could you meet us there? It would be very helpful to have a professional assessment. Minutes later, they were standing in the pristine marble lobby of my building. They were met there by a stern-looking man in a suit carrying a leather briefcase. Dr. Albright, the hired gun. The three of them rode the private elevator up to my floor. When the doors opened, they were met with the silent, imposing presence of my front door. They rang the bell. Once, twice. Then, Andre, pushed forward by a sharp look from Monique, began to pound on the wood. Dad! He shouted, his voice echoing in the empty hallway. Dad opened the door. We're worried about you. We have a doctor here to help. We just want to talk. But inside, I was silent. I stood in my dark office watching the three of them on the high-definition feed from my security camera. I saw their desperation. I saw their pathetic, transparent performance. And I saw their final desperate weapon, the man they had brought to declare me mentally unfit. They had shown me their entire strategy. And in doing so, they had given me all the ammunition I would ever need. I stood in the silent command center of my home, my eyes fixed on the security monitor. On the screen, a pathetic drama was unfolding. My son Andre continued to pound on the solid oak of my front door, his shouts becoming more desperate, more theatrical. Beside him, Monique stood with her arms crossed, her expression a mask of cold fury, while the man in the suit, their hired doctor, looked increasingly uncomfortable, like an actor who had forgotten his lines. They were putting on a show for an audience that refused to watch. But I was watching. And more importantly, I was recording. I did not move a muscle. I did not feel a flicker of doubt or a pang of pity. I simply observed them as a general would observe the futile maneuvers of a defeated enemy. Every shout, every gesture, every desperate plea was being saved to a secure server. I dragged the file to a new folder, renaming it with clinical precision, Evidence Harassment, September 27th. They thought they were laying a trap for me, trying to build a case for my incompetence. In reality, they were just building my case against them. After 10 long minutes, their performance lost its energy. Defeated, they turned and summoned the elevator, disappearing from my view, but not from my memory. The moment the elevator doors closed, my own actions began. My fortress was secure for the moment, but a true defense requires multiple layers. I picked up the phone and dialed the head of building security. Michael, this is Charles Evans, I said, my tone leaving no room for questions. I am issuing a formal directive. The access rights for Andre Evans and his wife Monique are to be permanently and irrevocably revoked. That includes all key fobs, garage access, and guest privileges. Under no circumstances are they to be allowed on my floor or in this building again without my direct verbal authorization. Is that understood perfectly, Mr. Evans? He replied. The first firewall was now a physical one. My next call was to a 24-hour locksmith service, one I had used for my company for years. I need a full lock replacement at my private residence, I said. Every door, every deadbolt. I want the most secure system you have, and I need it done tonight. Within the hour, a quiet professional locksmith was at my door, the sounds of drilling and metalwork echoing through my home. It was the sound of the past being permanently sealed away, the sound of safety. With the physical and financial walls in place, there was one final fortress to secure my legacy. I walked over to the grand mahogany desk that had been my partner through 45 years of business. It had seen contracts signed, deals made, and a company built from the ground up. Tonight it would witness an act of demolition and reconstruction. I powered on my computer and opened the most important document of my life, my last will and testament. For a moment, I stared at my son's name, Andre Charles Evans. For years, that name had represented the future of everything I had built. Now it was just a string of letters representing a devastating betrayal. My fingers moved to the keyboard. There was no hesitation. I highlighted his name and the entire section bequeathing to him the majority of my estate, the company shares, the properties, the portfolio. And then I pressed delete. In its place, I began to write. I poured my heart, my history, and my hopes for the future into the document. I outlined the creation of a new entity, a final project for a builder who had one more thing to construct. I named it the Eleanor Evans Foundation, after my late wife, the woman who had stood by me when I had nothing. Her memory deserved to be honored with creation, not destruction. The foundation's mission was clear: to provide scholarships and mentorship for underprivileged youth in Atlanta who wanted to build a future in engineering and construction. My life's work would no longer serve the greed of one undeserving man. It would now serve to build the dreams of thousands of deserving young people. I worked for hours, my focus absolute. I was not just a man writing a will. I was an architect designing a new future, a future free from the poison of entitlement and betrayal. As I wrote the final clause transferring the entirety of my $43 million fortune to the foundation upon my death, a profound sense of peace settled over me. It was done. The legacy was secure. Just as I saved the document, an email notification chimed softly on my screen. The subject line was Clinical Preliminary Lab Results, Sample 117B. It was from the private lab I had contacted. My heart did not race. I opened it with a steady hand. The text was brief and technical, but its meaning was as clear as the security footage. Preliminary results for the submitted liquid sample are positive for a significant concentration of carisoprodol, a powerful muscle relaxant and sedative mixed with an anticoagulant agent. This combination is highly dangerous and can induce cardiac arrest or internal bleeding, especially in an individual with a pre-existing heart condition. I leaned back in my chair and closed my eyes. There it was. The cold, hard scientific proof. It wasn't just a grab for my money. It wasn't just an act of greed. It was a calculated, cold-blooded attempt on my life. The vial in my pocket, the one that felt so heavy before, now felt like a weapon they had given me, and I knew with absolute certainty that I would have to use it. An entire week passed in silence. For Andre and Monique, I can only imagine it was a week of escalating panic, a slow descent into a special kind of hell they had built for themselves. I pictured them making frantic calls that went straight to my voicemail, sending a barrage of text messages that were delivered but never read. I imagined the moment of dawning horror when Monique tried to use her supplementary credit card at some expensive boutique only to have it declined. I imagined them checking their bank accounts only to find them empty, the steady stream of my generosity having been cut off at the source. They must have felt like astronauts whose tether to the mothership had been severed, left to drift in the cold, unforgiving vacuum of their own consequences. They were isolated, powerless, and running out of options. That was exactly where I wanted them. For me, it was a week of quiet, methodical preparation. I did not feel rage. The initial fiery anger had cooled, settling into something harder and more enduring, like steel forged in a fire. I spent my days in quiet reflection, solidifying the firewalls around my life and my legacy. The locks on my doors were new. The access codes were changed. The legal framework of my will and my foundation was now impenetrable. I was a builder, and I had spent the week ensuring my fortress was unbreachable before I dealt with the enemies at the gate. On the morning of the 8th day, I decided it was time. They had been given a week to comprehend the totality of their new reality. Now they would be summoned to face it. I did not contact them myself. That would have been a sign of weakness, an emotional engagement I was no longer willing to give. Instead, I called Ms. Davis. It's time, I told her. Send the message. A few moments later, a single sterile text message was sent to my son's phone, not from my number, but from a professional anonymous service used by her law firm. The message was brief, a command, not an invitation. It read, "Meet me at Parkview Terrace, our old table. Tomorrow at noon. Just the two of you." There was no room for negotiation. The location was deliberate, a return to the scene of their crime. The time was deliberate in the bright, unforgiving light of midday, not under the cover of darkness. And the final instruction was absolute. They were to come alone without their hired doctors or legal advisors. This was not going to be a negotiation. It was going to be a sentencing. That night I did not sleep. I sat in my office, the evidence laid out before me on the polished mahogany of my desk like instruments for a delicate but necessary surgery. This was not about revenge. Revenge is a messy, passionate, and ultimately unsatisfying affair. It is an act of chaos. What I was planning was the opposite. It was an act of order. It was about justice. It was about reasserting a moral balance to a universe they had tried so desperately to unhinge. I picked up the small USB drive and plugged it into my laptop. The security footage from the restaurant filled the screen. I watched it again, my face impassive. I saw myself distracted for a moment. I saw Andre, my son, with his casual glance around the room before he tipped the contents of the vial into my glass. There was no hesitation, no flicker of doubt. It was the easy, practiced movement of someone who believed they were entitled to take whatever they wanted, even a life. I saw Monique's subtle, approving nod from the corner of the screen. They were a team united in their greed. I saved a copy of the video, a small, undeniable piece of their blackened souls. Next, I reread the lab report. The clinical scientific language was somehow more chilling than any emotional description could be. Carisoprodol, anticoagulant, highly dangerous, cardiac arrest, internal bleeding. These were not the words of a family squabble. These were the words of an attempted murder. The report was cold factual, and it solidified my resolve beyond any shadow of a doubt. My son had not just wanted my money, he had been willing to kill me for it. Then I listened to the audio file of Monique's phone call, her voice shifting from venomous anger to saccharine concern. It was the sound of a predator changing its camouflage. The recording was a testament to her manipulative nature, a clear illustration of their plan to have me declared mentally unfit. Finally, I looked at the bank statement, the clean, crisp record of the $5 million transfer that had been initiated and then thankfully canceled. It was the motive written in black and white. The entire sordid story was here in these 4 pieces of evidence. A conspiracy of greed, betrayal, and violence. As the first light of dawn began to break over the city, I felt a deep, profound sadness wash over me. It was a final moment of mourning, not for the man my son had become, but for the little boy he once was. But the grief did not weaken me. It clarified my purpose. I was not doing this out of hatred for my son. I was doing it out of respect for myself, for my late wife, and for the life we had built together. I would not allow them to desecrate it. I organized the files into a slim briefcase, showered, and put on my finest suit. I was not going to a family meeting. I was going to the final board meeting of my old life, and I was about to announce its dissolution. I was there first. I chose the same table, a silent testament to the night that had changed everything. To the outside world, I was just a well-dressed old man enjoying a solitary lunch with the best view in Atlanta. But I was not enjoying the view. I was a hunter, and I was waiting for my prey to walk into a trap of their own making. They arrived exactly at noon. Andre looked like he hadn't slept in a week, his expensive suit hanging loosely on his frame, his face pale and drawn. Monique, however, still had fight in her. She had masked her exhaustion with a flawless layer of makeup, and she walked with a forced confidence that was almost admirable in its audacity. In her hand, she clutched a leather portfolio like a shield. They looked less like a son and daughter-in-law and more like co-conspirators arriving for a parole hearing. They sat down without a word of greeting. The air was thick with unspoken accusations. Monique, ever the strategist, decided to launch the first and final offensive of their pathetic war. She placed the portfolio on the table with a soft thud, a sound that was meant to be authoritative. "Charles," she began, her voice a practiced blend of concern and condescension. "We're so glad you agreed to meet. After your behavior last week, we've become extremely concerned for your health. We've spoken to a specialist and we have prepared the necessary paperwork to apply for a temporary guardianship." She slid a document out of the portfolio. The legal jargon was visible even from across the table. It's for your own good, to protect you from yourself until you are thinking more clearly. I let her finish. I let the arrogant, insulting words hang in the air between us. I looked at my son, who refused to meet my gaze, staring intently at a water stain on the tablecloth. Then I looked back at Monique, held her gaze for a long moment, and offered a single dismissive smile. "That won't be necessary," I said. My voice was quiet, but it cut through her speech like a razor. And then I began. From the slim briefcase beside me, I removed my own set of documents. But mine were not filled with legal theories about my incompetence. They were filled with cold, hard facts. I laid the first item on the table, a single sheet of paper in a clear plastic sleeve. "Exhibit A," I said calmly, as if presenting in a boardroom. "The final lab report on the sample I took from my juice glass that night. I'm sure you'll find the medical language fascinating. It speaks of a compound called carisoprodol, a powerful sedative. It also mentions a significant presence of an anticoagulant, a blood thinner. The report concludes that this specific combination is highly dangerous and could induce cardiac arrest or internal bleeding in a man my age." I pushed the paper towards the center of the table. "The doctors call it poison. I wonder what you would call it." Monique's practiced smile flickered. Andre, for the first time, looked up at me, his eyes wide with a dawning horror. I didn't wait for an answer. I placed my second item on the table. It was a small black USB drive. It looked tiny and harmless. "Exhibit B," I continued, my voice even and measured. "This contains the high-definition security footage from this restaurant from the night in question. It's quite a dramatic little film. It shows you, Andre, looking around before you lean over and pour a white powder from a vial into my glass. It even captures a lovely little moment where you, Monique, give him a subtle nod of encouragement. The district attorney will find it particularly compelling, I think." Monique's face had gone completely pale. The blood drained from it, leaving her makeup looking like a grotesque mask. She opened her mouth to speak, but no sound came out. Andre looked like he was going to be physically sick. But of course I went on, my voice relentless. "A crime needs a motive." Which brings me to Exhibit C. I slid a bank statement across the table, a single line item highlighted in yellow. "A wire transfer for $5 million initiated by you, Andre, using your third-party access." The transfer was to an untraceable offshore account in the Cayman Islands. It was initiated just minutes after you left me here, assuming your little cocktail was doing its work. You were trying to drain the accounts while your father was dying. The silence that followed was absolute. It was so profound that I could hear the clinking of silverware from a table halfway across the room. Their world had been shattered, and all that was left was the deafening sound of their own guilt. I had one final piece. This one was for Monique. I placed a small digital audio recorder on the table. And finally, Exhibit D, a little recording of a phone call I received later that evening. I pressed play. Her own voice filled the air between us, the sound tinny, but unmistakably hers. "Charles, it's Monique. We were so worried when you left. You just seemed so confused. We think perhaps it's time you let Andre help you manage your finances." I pressed stop. I looked at her. The mask was gone. All that was left was the raw, ugly face of her greed and her hatred. Her eyes darted around the restaurant as if searching for an escape route, but there was nowhere to go. Andre had slumped in his chair, his head in his hands, a broken man. The confident predators who had sat down opposite me just moments ago were gone. In their place were two small, trapped, and terrified criminals. They had come here to declare me incompetent, and I in turn had declared them obsolete. I let the silence sit. I let it press down on them, a physical weight of their own making. The bustling sounds of the restaurant, the laughter from other tables, the gentle clinking of glasses, all of it seemed to fade into a distant muted roar. Our table had become an island of cold, hard truth in a sea of blissful ignorance. Andre was still staring at his hands, his entire body trembling. Monique's breath was coming in short, ragged gasps, her mind visibly racing, searching for an angle, a lie, an escape route where none existed. I had sealed every exit. All that was left was the judgment. When I finally spoke, my voice was not loud, but it commanded the absolute attention of the two broken people sitting before me. It was the voice of a man who had been pushed past the point of anger beyond the realm of grief and had arrived at a place of pure, unshakable resolve. "Your lives as you have known them are over. I began my tone calm and factual. The free ride, the endless generosity, the trust you so casually shattered, all of it is gone. What happens next, however, is still in your hands. I am going to give you two choices. I suggest you listen very carefully because this will be the last important decision you ever make that involves me. I leaned forward slightly, my gaze fixed on them both. Option A is justice. The wheels of this option are already in motion. My lawyer, Ms. Davis, is sitting in her office right now waiting for a phone call from me. If I make that call, she will forward this entire file, the lab report, the video, the bank records, the audio recording, directly to the district attorney's office. A warrant will be issued for your arrests before you even have time to finish your water. There will be a trial. But with this evidence, it will be a short one. You will be convicted of conspiracy and attempted murder, and you, Andre, and Monique will spend the next 20 years, maybe more, of your lives in a prison cell. That is one path. It is clean, it is final, and it is what you deserve. I let the image of a prison cell settle in their minds. The loss of freedom, the daily humiliation, the years wasting away. I saw a flicker of raw terror in Andre's eyes. Then there is option B. I continued, my voice just as level. Option B is exile. This is not mercy. Let me be very clear about that. It is a practical solution for me to remove you from my life with the least amount of public mess. If you choose this option, you will stand up from this table, walk out of this restaurant, and disappear from my life forever. Your names will be legally removed from my will, from every trust, every account, every property deed. You will be financially disinherited completely and utterly. Every credit card will be canceled, every allowance stopped. You will be on your own to earn your own living and pay your own way in this world, something neither of you has ever had to do. I paused, then turned my gaze directly to my son. And there is one more condition for option B, a non-negotiable one for you, Andre. You will check into a therapeutic program for long-term psychological evaluation and treatment. I will choose the facility, and I will pay for it. My lawyer will receive weekly reports on your progress. If you miss a single session, if you drop out, if you do not comply in every single way. Option A is automatically activated. It will be the first clause in our legally binding separation agreement. You will not do this for you. You will do this so I can have some assurance that the sickness in your soul is being contained. The choice was laid bare. Public justice and imprisonment, or private exile and irrelevance. For a moment, there was only the sound of Andre's shaky breathing. Then something inside Monique finally snapped. The years of carefully constructed grace, of manipulative smiles and feigned affection, all of it burned away in a spectacular eruption of pure, unfiltered hatred. Her chair scraped back violently as she shot to her feet. Her face was a twisted, unrecognizable mask of rage. "You stingy old man!" she shrieked, her voice shrill and ugly, turning heads at the nearby tables. "You selfish, arrogant fool! After everything we did for you, pretending to care, pretending to listen to your boring stories. You were supposed to be grateful. You should have just gotten sick. You should have just died." The venom in her words was shocking, but it was also liberating. It was the truth, finally, in all its hideous glory. She was not a misguided daughter-in-law. She was a monster. Her outburst shattered whatever was left of Andre's composure. He collapsed forward, his forehead hitting the table with a dull thud. A terrible, gut-wrenching sob tore from his throat. He began to cry, not like a man, but like a lost and terrified child. His shoulders heaved, his words choked and broken. "I'm sorry, Dad." He wept, his voice muffled by the tablecloth. "I'm so sorry. I didn't know. It was her. She made me. It was all her idea. It was the final pathetic act of a coward. The last desperate attempt to shift the blame, to find a lifeline where there was none." I watched the two of them, one consumed by rage, the other drowning in self-pity, and I felt nothing. Not anger, not sadness, just a profound and empty distance. The people I thought were my family were gone. In their place were these two grotesque strangers, their souls laid bare for me to see. I watched the ugly tableau before me, the final pathetic act of their desperate play. I saw Monique, her beautiful face contorted by a rage so pure it was almost primal, her chest heaving with the aftermath of her venomous shriek. She had finally shown me the monster she had kept hidden behind a mask of sweet smiles and false concern. And I saw my son Andre, a grown man, weeping into a tablecloth in the middle of a five-star restaurant, his cowardly attempt to blame his wife for his own sins hanging in the air like a foul odor. There was nothing left to say. There was no explanation, no apology that could ever bridge the chasm that now lay between us. They had made their choices long ago. All that was left was for them to live with them. Slowly, deliberately, I rose to my feet. I was not angry, I was not triumphant, I was simply done. The emotional storm had passed, leaving behind a vast and quiet emptiness. It was the feeling a surgeon must have after a long and difficult amputation. There is no joy in the severing, only a grim necessity and the hope for a healthier future, even if it is a diminished one. I smoothed the front of my suit jacket and adjusted my tie, small mundane actions that felt like a quiet reclamation of my own dignity, my own order in the face of their chaos. I looked down at them one last time. Monique had sunk back into her chair, the fire in her eyes extinguished, replaced by the cold, dead ashes of defeat. Andre was still a shuddering, incoherent mess. "I don't want to hear it," I said, my voice cutting through his sobs with quiet finality. "No more excuses. No more lies." I placed my hands on the back of my chair, my posture erect, my resolve absolute. "You have 5 minutes to choose your future, a prison cell or a life of exile. It makes no difference to me which path you take, but my decision is already made." And with that, I turned my back on them. I turned my back on my son, on the woman who had helped him try to kill me, and on the entire poisonous chapter of my life they represented. I began to walk away from the table, my footsteps steady and measured on the polished floor. The other diners who had momentarily paused at Monique's outburst were now pretending to be absorbed in their own meals, casting furtive glances in my direction. They could feel the weight of the moment, even if they could not comprehend its terrible specifics. They saw an old man walking away from a family drama. They did not see a man walking away from the wreckage of his own heart. With each step, I felt a layer of burden sloughing off. I was walking away from years of manufactured affection, of veiled insults, of a growing, unnamed dread. I was walking away from the constant low-level anxiety of knowing something was wrong but being unwilling to face it. I was walking away from the foolish hope that my son would one day become the man I had always wanted him to be. I was walking away from a lie, and with every step the truth, however painful, began to feel like freedom. As I approached the grand entrance of the restaurant, I saw a familiar figure standing near the door. It was Walter, the security guard, his shift now over. He was not looking at me, but I knew he was waiting. He had been a silent witness to this final act. Our eyes met across the lobby. There was no need for words. I gave him a slow, deliberate nod. It was a gesture of profound gratitude and acknowledgement that his simple act of human decency had saved me from a fate worse than losing my money. He nodded back, a look of quiet respect in his kind eyes. In that brief, silent exchange, I felt more genuine connection than I had felt with my own son in over a decade. Then I pushed open the heavy glass door and stepped out of the dim, climate-controlled restaurant and into the bright, unfiltered glare of the afternoon sun. The light was almost blinding for a moment, and I paused, letting my eyes adjust. The warmth of the sun on my face felt real honest. The sounds of the city, the distant wail of a siren, the rumble of traffic, the chatter of people walking by, all of it rushed in to fill the silence that Andre and Monique had left behind. It was the sound of life continuing, indifferent to my personal tragedy, and I found it strangely comforting. I did not look back at the restaurant. I did not need to. I could picture the scene perfectly. Monique, the rage gone now, staring at the evidence on the table, the full weight of her ruin crashing down upon her. Andre, his pathetic tears drying, now faced with the terrifying reality of a life without my name, without my money, without my protection. I left them there trapped in the wreckage of their own greed, forever bound to the ugly truth of what they had done. The camera of my mind pulled away, leaving them to shrink in the grand dining room, two small, insignificant figures consumed by the consequences of their choices. Their game was over. They had gambled everything, and they had lost. 3 months passed. The suffocating heat of the Atlanta summer gave way to the crisp, clean air of autumn. The leaves on the trees outside my penthouse window began to turn, painting the city in hues of gold and crimson. It felt like the world was turning a page, and so was I. The silence in my home was no longer the heavy, oppressive silence of betrayal. It was a comfortable, peaceful quiet, filled not with ghosts of the past, but with the promise of a future I was finally building for myself. The setting for the final act of my old life was the corner office of my lawyer, Ms. Davis. Her firm occupied the top floor of a downtown skyscraper, and through the floor-to-ceiling windows I could see the headquarters of Evans Construction, the company I had sold, standing tall and proud in the distance. A few months ago, that sight might have brought a pang of loss. Today, I felt only a serene sense of detachment. It was a part of my history, not my destiny. I sat opposite Ms. Davis at her large glass desk. She was, as always, the picture of professional composure, but today I could see a genuine warmth in her eyes. The legal warrior who had helped me build my firewalls was now the architect helping me design my new life. "The final reports are in Charles," she said, her voice gentle but clear. "I thought you should know." She slid a slim folder across the desk, though she knew I would not need to read it. They chose option B. Andre checked into the designated facility in Arizona 2 months ago. The weekly reports indicate he is, at least for now, fully compliant with the terms of the program. He is attending all his mandatory sessions. I nodded slowly, absorbing the information without emotion. It was not good news or bad news. It was simply a fact, a loose end being tied up. "And Monique?" I asked, my voice even. As expected, Ms. Davis replied, a hint of disdain in her tone. She filed for divorce from Andre last month, citing irreconcilable differences. Her lawyers tried to make a claim against your assets, arguing that her marriage to your son entitled her to a portion of the family wealth. We sent them a copy of the evidence file you compiled. They withdrew their claim the next day. She paused. Our private investigator confirmed that she sold her car and jewelry and has moved to the West Coast. She has, for all intents and purposes, vanished. And that was it. The great dramatic conspiracy that had almost cost me my life had dissolved into such a pathetic and predictable ending. A coward in therapy and a predator on the run. There was no grand explosion, just a quiet fizzle into nothingness. I felt a sense of closure but no satisfaction. Their fate was no longer my concern. My future was. "Thank you, Ms. Davis," I said. "Now let's talk about what really matters." She smiled and pushed a second, much thicker folder towards me. "The final charter for the foundation," she announced. "Ready for your signature." I opened the folder. Inside were the documents that represented the rest of my life, the legal framework for my new purpose. For the next hour, I read through every clause, every line item, every detail that would give birth to my true legacy. When I was done, I picked up the heavy ink-filled pen she offered me. My hand did not tremble. I looked at the signature line at the bottom of the page, the space waiting to be filled. For a moment, I thought of all the other documents I had signed on desks, just like this one. Contracts worth millions, blueprints that became skyscrapers, a will that promised a fortune to a son who had proven unworthy. All of those signatures had been about building things out of steel and concrete, about accumulating wealth and power. This signature was different. This one was about transforming that wealth into something meaningful, something that would last long after the steel had rusted and the concrete had crumbled. I was redirecting a river of fortune away from a poisoned and barren field and towards a community that was thirsty for opportunity. I pressed the nib to the paper and signed my name, Charles Evans. With that simple act, the Eleanor Evans Foundation was born. A new life, a new purpose, a new legacy, all created from the ashes of a terrible betrayal. I leaned back in my chair and looked at Ms. Davis. A weight I hadn't even realized I was still carrying had finally lifted from my shoulders. I felt lighter. I felt healthier. I felt, for the first time in a very long time, truly at peace. "It's done," I said, a genuine smile spreading across my face. "Congratulations, Charles," she said warmly. "You've done a wonderful thing." I stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the city below. All those buildings, all that work, it had all been a means to an end, and the end was only just beginning. "I've spent my whole life building structures, Ms. Davis," I said, my voice filled with a quiet, newfound energy. "Now it's time to build futures." The place where I found my new beginning was not in a boardroom or a bank, but on a sprawling construction site on the south side of Atlanta. The air smelled of fresh-cut lumber, wet concrete, and the rich promise of things being built. 6 months after that fateful dinner, this had become my sanctuary. I stood on a rise of red Georgia clay, the setting sun casting long shadows over the steel skeleton of what would one day be a community vocational center. I was no longer the owner of a company. I was a man with a purpose. Surrounding me was a group of 12 young men and women. They were the inaugural class of the Eleanor Evans Foundation Scholars. Their faces were bright, eager, and full of the kind of raw potential that had once set my own heart on fire. They were kids from tough neighborhoods, kids who had been told that the world had no place for them. I was there to tell them they were wrong. I pointed to a set of blueprints spread across the hood of a dusty pickup truck. "You see this load-bearing wall," I said, my voice filled with an energy I hadn't felt in years. "It's not just about the steel, it's about the tension, the balance. Everything has to work together. A building is a team, just like the people who build it." A young woman named Keisha, who had a mind for physics that was sharper than any I'd ever seen, asked a brilliant question about structural integrity. A young man named Jamal, who had been in trouble with the law before earning this scholarship, pointed out a potential flaw in the workflow. We were not just talking about construction, we were talking about life. And as I looked at their faces, truly listening to them, I smiled. It was a real smile, a smile that reached my eyes and warmed my soul. I was no longer a lonely millionaire isolated in a glass tower. I was a teacher, a mentor, a builder in the truest sense of the word. In the middle of our conversation, my phone buzzed in my pocket. I excused myself for a moment, stepping away from the group. I pulled out the phone expecting a message from Ms. Davis, but the name on the screen was one I had not seen in months. Andre. My finger hovered over the screen, a ghost of the old pain, the old connection stirring within me. I finally opened the message. It contained only 3 words. "I am trying." I stared at the words for a long time. There was no request for money, no plea for forgiveness, just a simple, stark statement. "I am trying." I thought of my son hundreds of miles away in the Arizona desert, trying to piece together a life from the wreckage he had made. I felt a flicker of something, not forgiveness, not love, but a distant, detached acknowledgement. He was on his own path now, a difficult journey I had set him upon, and I had to let him walk it alone. His struggle was his own, no longer mine to carry. I did not reply. I simply slipped the phone back into my pocket and turned my attention back to the group of students waiting for me. I chose my new family. I chose my new future. As the sun dipped below the horizon, bathing the entire site in a warm, golden light, my own voice seemed to fill my mind, a final reflection on the long road I had traveled. Legacy is not what you leave for people I thought. It's what you leave in them. For years, I thought my legacy would be the company, the buildings, the fortune. But that was just a fortune built on concrete and steel. I chose instead to leave a legacy of hope and opportunity in the hearts of these young people. And for the first time in so many years, standing here in the dust and the noise, I feel truly wealthy. "All right," I said to the students, clapping my hands together. "Day's over. Let's pack it up. Tomorrow we'll talk about foundations." I turned and began to walk with them towards the gate, their lively chatter filling the air. I was no longer a solitary figure walking away from a painful past. I was part of a team walking towards a shared future. I blended in with the group, just another builder heading home after a good day's work, my silhouette merging with theirs against the beautiful blazing sunset. And it was more than enough. Your true wealth is not the fortune you accumulate, but the integrity you refuse to sacrifice. Trust must be earned, not inherited, and sometimes the strongest foundation you can build is a boundary that protects your own peace. True legacy is built on character, not currency.